In our previous videos, we have talked about the pros and cons of static and dynamic HTML. The pros of static HTML is it is very readable, easy to maintain, and very declarative. But at the same time, dynamic HTML is hard to read, lot of boilerplate code, and hard to maintain. And that is the problem that we are going to solve in this video. So when you look at static HTML, this is how it looks like. But dynamic looks something like this. So how can we fix the problem? So to fix the problem, let's have a goal in our head. What do we actually want? So we don't have to think too much about how we are going to solve the problem because we have already solved the problem in static. So this is really good way of writing structure. Is like it is readable, it is easy to maintain and very declarative. So our goal should be, so what if I can just write something like this here in dynamic HTML and it works? And that is what we are going to work on. So let's go ahead and try to see how we can move forward from here. So we have a to-do application and our to-do application is fully functional. You can go ahead and add a to-do by saying play basketball. Press enter and you can see that the to-do is added. You can click on it and mark it as done. You can click on different buttons like right now all, but you can click on active, completed. You can clear all the completed and then come back to all again. So it is working. So here, if you look at the main function where we are creating HTML dynamically, that is our create UI function. So create UI function accepts a data and based on that data, it is going to create the UI using document.createElement and stuff like that. So here when you look at this code, you will see that we are writing a lot of boilerplate code. Like look at this, document.createElement and that too, how many times here? Just for this small UI right here. If we have to create a very complex UI, then it will be too much. But right now you can see there are 4 document.createElement right here only. So whenever you try to fix this kind of a problem, the best way to go about it is to create a small abstraction. Abstraction can be a function and that function can help you create element. So let's go ahead and create a function and we'll call this function element. Why we are calling it element? Because we don't get confused with document.createElement. The function element is going to accept a type. Type means the name of the element. As you can see it here. And based on that, it is going to create the element of whatever type you pass as parameter. And at last, what we can do is return the element. So we are done. Like we have created a small function that accepts a type, creates the type and return that element. So now rather than using document.createElement, we can go ahead and change it to just element. You refresh the app, nothing will change because everything is working as it was working earlier. Now before moving forward, we need to understand what we are doing here. So we are creating a function that creates the element. So for that we need to understand what is an element made up of properly. So for that I have created multiple diagrams here. So we'll start with, so here we can see we have a UL element. So every element consists of 3 important things. The name of the element, you can also call it type of element or the name of the element. Some attributes like class, ID, type, etc. And attributes are optional, right? So here we also need another thing that is children. Like each element can have a children. It means it is also optional. It can have 1 children or it can also have multiple children. Here it can have 1 child or it can have multiple children. And that is what we can see it here. Like it has 2 children, that is multiple li. One more thing we will have to think here. That is the children of UI can be an element. It means that li itself is an element. But in other cases, like think about h1 element. h1 is the name of the element. This is the attribute it needs. And here hello world, it's a children. But the point is, hello world is not an element. You can have a text as a children. You can have multiple object as children also because each element in terms of DOM is an object. So I can call it like an object. So element can have three things: the name of the element, all the attributes that is optional, and it can have multiple children. And the children can be of two types. It can either be object or it can be a string. So this is what we learned about elements. Let us go ahead and try to implement that in our ELM function. So right now we are calling the function ELM and passing li parameter here. Let's look at the HTML structure. So when we look at HTML structure, here we can see each li has how many children? 1, 2, and 3. So if you look at li, you can see that li doesn't have any attribute, but it has 3 children: input, p, and span. And the input element has some attributes that you can see: type, class, and data ID. So that is what we are going to take care of next, all the attributes. So for attributes, we can see that one element can have multiple attributes like type, class name, checked, and also some special attributes like data ID and stuff like that. So to take care of it, like the way I'm thinking of doing that is passing the second parameter that can contain multiple data, and for multiple data I need key and value pair. So I'm just sticking to object. So in this object we need to pass all the attributes that we need. So we need type, that will go to checkbox. Similarly, we need class name. So class name, we can say it like class name should be equal to check, and later on checked should be coming from to do. So we'll say checked should be equal to do dot is done. And the last one we need is data ID, and that is coming from I. Data ID is the name of the attribute and the value is going to be I. So this is how I want to pass it. Now how can I handle that? So for that I'll just go ahead and comment this 4-line of code, and here we are going to take care of that. So our element function is going to accept another parameter, that is attribute, and that will default to empty object. And that object is going to have multiple key and value pair. So for that we will have to loop over attribute. So we can use for in loop to loop over object. So we'll say for let key in attribute. Now here if you look at all the attributes, there are some attribute like type, class name, and checked that can directly go on to the element, but data ID we should set it using set attribute. So we'll put a condition here. We'll say if key, and we need to check whether key is starting with data hyphen or not. So we can use the string method starts with, and starts with except one parameter that I want. If the key is starting with data hyphen, you have to set it using set attribute. So we'll say element dot set attribute, and the key that we have is data ID and the value is coming, and to access the value we'll say attribute and key. So this is how we'll get the value. If that is not the case, just go ahead and add it inside the element only. So we'll say element, add this key, and the value will come from attribute of that specific key. So we'll get the value, we'll add this as an attribute inside the element. Now let's go ahead and try to test it. So I'll copy this code, refresh it here, and here we can just paste it. So we are calling the function element with first parameter of input. Second parameter is all the attributes. Let's press enter. And it is throwing an error saying to do is not defined, because here to do is actually not defined. So instead of to do dot is done, let's call it false for now. Now if we look at the value of input, let's see what is the value of input. Here we can see only data ID is there. All these attributes like type, class name, and checked is not there. Let's see why it is. Here we are having an issue. The issue is we are saying ELM. That is not right. So instead of ELM, we should be calling it element. Refresh it and call it again to check if it is working properly or not. Look at the value of input. Now we can see that input is a type of checkbox, class is check, and ID is 0. So in that way, our function is working properly. So let's go ahead and refactor our code to use the latest function. So on the first line, li doesn't have any attribute. Input has all the attribute. We have added it. We'll delete this line. Moving on to next, here we have p element. So again, we'll pass this as attribute here to p. So let's pass it like input text is equal to to-do.name. Remove this line. In span, we need to pass these two attributes. So pass it like an object. Here, class name will be delete. Inner text will be cross symbol. And at last, we need to add ID, the same thing that we were doing it input. Once done, we'll go ahead and delete this part. So we have converted our code to use the latest function that can accept name of the element and attributes. Refresh this and we can see our app is back to the normal. If you just try to use it like by adding some to-do list like play basketball, press enter and it is working properly. Click on it, cross it, and things are working properly for us. So in this way, we have created our element function in such a way that accepts two parameters for now, that is type and attribute. Attribute is a collection of all the attributes that we need. We are creating the element, looping over the object, and if the key starts with data hyphen, we set the attribute using setAttribute function. Otherwise, we are directly adding it to the element. So for now, this part is done. In our next video, we'll continue this and take it forward.